Zen and the Art of Remaining Awake, Part 7, Sunday the 3rd of January 2021. In 321 AD, mainstream Christianity, with the blessing of the Roman Emperor Constantine, designated today, Sunday, a day of rest. But as today happens to be Greta Thunberg's 18th birthday, maybe it's also a day on which to face facts, however inconvenient. Somewhat apprehensively, after a shower, I step on the bathroom scales to discover that I weigh 84 kilos, or 185 pounds. An online body mass index calculator informs me that, though not categorized obese, I would be advised to lose 10 kilos. 10 kilos is 22 pounds, the weight, for instance, of a mountain bike, of 2 10-pin bowling balls, or of 3 gallons of water. If it's true, as Mary Oliver submits in her poem The Summer Day, that everything dies at last and too soon, then surely impetus is given to the question she raises at the end of that remarkable piece of writing. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Now that I'm approaching 70, I understand the solemnity of that inquiry, and my awakening interest in living healthily calls to mind John Stuart Collis and his book Living with a Stranger, a discourse on the human body. Despite his miserable childhood in Dublin, for John's twin brother was smothered in maternal affection, whereas he was shunned from the moment of his birth. The Irishman's accomplishments are considerable. It reveals much of a man who knew both T.S. Eliot and Yeats, and who wrote the biographies of George Bernard Shaw, Strindberg, Tolstoy and Columbus, that he considered his greatest life achievement to have been the planting of a few acres of woodland, which subsequently bore his name. During the Second World War, as part of the Land Army, Collis discovered for himself the therapeutic power of Mother Nature, while working in Cranbourne Chase, today classified an area of outstanding natural beauty. Once a royal hunting ground, the Chase still straddles Dorset, Wiltshire and Hampshire, though human incursions have shrunk it in size since Thomas Hardy praised its grandeur. In Tess of the D'Urbervilles, he calls it a truly venerable tract of forest land, one of the few remaining woodlands in England of undoubted primeval date, wherein druidical mistletoe was still found on aged oaks, and where enormous yew trees, not planted by the hand of men, grew as they had grown when they were pollarded for longbows. Having written a book celebrating the complexity of the human body, Collis required a title, and he drew inspiration from Augustine of Hippo. Men go abroad, the saint wrote, in order to wonder at the heights of mountains, at the huge waves of the sea, at the long courses of the river, at the vast compass of the ocean, at the circular motion of the stars, and they pass by themselves, without wondering. Thus, Living with a Stranger became the title of his book, the stranger being the body we inhabit, the body we need to get to know far better, the body we need to befriend, the body we need to love. Collis, a pioneer of the ecology movement, also authored The Triumph of the Trees and The Worm Forgives the Plough. He borrowed that last title from William Blake, who wove it into a web of provocative aphorisms entitled Proverbs of Hell, many of which, like Zen koans, are worth pondering. For example, he who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. All wholesome food is caught without a net or a trap. The cut worm forgives the plough. Another man well placed to proselytize about Mother Nature's therapeutic powers was the environmental campaigner Barry Lopez, who won the 1986 National Book Award for non-fiction with Arctic Dreams. The effort to know place deeply, he wrote, is ultimately an expression of the human desire to belong, to fit somewhere, and in his essay, The Invitation, he lays down 3 rules about how to achieve this.
The first rule of everything we endeavor to do is to pay attention. The second rule is to be patient. The third is to be attentive to what the body knows.
My body knows it would function far more efficiently and complain far less if I shed 10 kilos of fat, while at the same time gaining muscle and flexibility. It also knows that, according to the World Health Association, the average birth weight of a boy is 3.3 kilos or 7 pounds 3 ounces. The maths is simple, its conclusion alarming. I am, in effect, carrying an excess of fat equivalent in weight to newly born triplets, 3 strapping boys. What's more, I may have been doing so for years. Being pro-life, I know what I must do. Terminate my unhealthy lifestyle. For second only to tobacco, obesity is the largest contributing factor to premature death. Is it not immoral, indeed verging on obscene, that very well-paid sports celebrities are prepared to advertise junk food that they themselves wouldn't eat? Why in 2011 did the Williams sisters endorse triple-double Oreo? Why in 2012 did David Beckham promote Burger King's strawberry banana smoothies, which then contained 50 grams of sugar per serving? Why is Gary Lineker prepared to be a brand ambassador for Walker's Crisps, and even to morph into a doppelganger of the Kentucky Fried Chicken mascot, Colonel Saunders? While watching Andrew Marr interview Boris Johnson, I find myself howling at the TV. Why in God's name doesn't the Scotsman deliver a knockout blow when Boris is clearly on the ropes, punch-drunk and flailing? He began so auspiciously, determined to pin down the precise reason for the government's indisputable failure to control the spread of COVID-19.
OK, let's see how we got here. Back in July, your government commissioned a report into what was going to happen this winter. And Keir Starmer said, "Have you read it?" And you hadn't read it. Have you read it now?
Well, let's be absolutely clear that this government has taken every possible step that we reasonably could to prepare this country for the consequences of winter. What we could not have foreseen, I think, reasonably, was the arrival of a new variant of the vaccine. But which was spreading between 50% and 70% faster.
What I have here is that report.
Once we did understand that, on I think the 18th of December at 3:15 p.m, we took decisive action.
Except that this report, which perhaps you should have read back in July, does talk directly about the danger of mutation this winter, and describes in extraordinary detail exactly what is happening now.
Which is exactly why we took the action that we did.
But you were warned in advance.
This was when Marr, lost for words, threw in the towel. Instead of seizing a golden opportunity, he should have turned to the camera and addressed the nation directly.
Viewers will have noticed that, while the Prime Minister recalls how, on the 18th of December at 3:15 p.m, his government took decisive action in response to a new variant spreading up to 70% faster than the old, he is unable to recall whether he has read his own government's report, published last July, into the likely development of the pandemic this winter.
By landing such a blow, Ma would have fulfilled all three aims of the mission statement drawn up by the BBC's founders: to inform, to educate, and to entertain. On the 1 o'clock news, a doctor clarifies why Nightingale hospitals, so hyped by Johnson's government, are no more than mirages. She points out that though you can swiftly erect and stock buildings with medical equipment, you simply can't conjure highly trained staff from thin air. She reminds us that even before the first COVID-19 case was confirmed, less than a year ago, on the 30th of January 2020, the NHS was already operating with a shortfall of 100,000 nurses. She introduces me to a term I've not heard before: a Potemkin hospital. The doctor is alluding to Prince Potemkin, a member of the Russian aristocracy who, in the 18th century, fabricated fake villages, like the ones you see in Hollywood movies. Along routes travelled by Catherine the Great, the prince sought to create an illusion of wealth in order to impress her. Similarly, Boris and Hancock have sought to conjure an illusion. No wonder that in a tweet Hugh Grant dismisses Johnson's entire cabinet as a little gang of masturbatory prefects. I switch off the news and seek philosophical advice. Marcus Aurelius reminds me, "You have power over your own mind, but not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It was Aristotle who, in order to heighten our sense of awe, pointed out that paradoxically, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The same notion was popularized by the American physicist John Archibald Wheeler, who said, "We live on an island surrounded by a sea of ignorance. As our island of knowledge grows, so too does the shoreline of our ignorance." Professor Wheeler, the man who popularized the term black hole, employs this metaphor to illustrate that scientific progress does not only provide answers, but also expands the seemingly infinite boundary between the known and the unknown. I, personally, am in an elementary class as far as knowing what a healthy vegan diet consists of. You have to begin somewhere, so I make use of Google to ascertain the best vegan alternative to cow milk. I'm looking for something that won't curdle my tea or overwhelm delicate flavours. According to the charity Veganuary, oat milk wins that accolade. How exhilarating to know that despite the lockdown, I can nevertheless access the collective wisdom of this organisation's 2.5 million members. As I am determined to lose weight, I ponder again the 7 myths that the anthropologist Herman Ponsner has drawn up in this week's New Scientist, focusing primarily on the absurd fable that calories don't matter, so there's no need to count them. On Veganuary's website, I am reminded that with every 100 millilitres of semi-skimmed milk I splash on my cereal, I may be consuming as much as 50 calories. But that figure could fall to as few as 36 if I opted for Plenish, a gluten-free drink composed of but 3 ingredients: water, salt, and organic oats. In the Tao Te Ching, written some 300 years before Christ, Lao Tzu observed that A tree as great as a man's embrace springs from a small shoot. A terrace 9 stories high begins with a pile of earth. And a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. To ensure I'm headed in the right direction, I do some simple arithmetic. If I were to drink half a litre of Plenish rather than cow's milk per day, this single simple step would prevent me annually from pouring 25,550 calories down my throat. That's the equivalent of over 2.5 kilos of pure animal fat, that white ridge coating raw pork and bacon that health-conscious cooks trim away. As evening falls, with Benji at my side, I set off for a walk through the grounds of Ruskin Mill, a special education college where I worked before COVID showed me the door. Down here in the frozen valley, with the hills huddling close, an undulating path leads me to a heron, standing so motionless that even Benji fails to notice its presence. I can hardly believe my luck. I can almost reach out and touch that extraordinary creature. In her poem, Heron rises from the dark summer pond. Mary Oliver becomes as one with these birds, before alighting on the problematic issue that is death.
Heron rises from the dark summer pond. So heavy is the long-necked, long-bodied heron, always it is a surprise when her smoke-colored wings open and she turns from the thick water, from the black sticks of the summer pond, and slowly rises into the air and is gone. Then, not for the first or the last time, I take the deep breath of happiness, and I think how unlikely it is that death is a hole in the ground, how improbable that ascension is not possible, though everything seems so inert, so nailed.
How the heron that's within arm's reach survives these temperatures is beyond me. It's bitterly cold, so I walk briskly. The last time I was here it was snowing, and Benji was a deliriously happy puppy. He still darts ahead, exhilarated by invisible scents. When I get home, it's to hear Sir Keir Starmer on the evening news demanding another full lockdown. Prime Minister, he begs, please don't dilly-dally again, as you've done throughout the entire COVID catastrophe. My son Oliver zooms in from California. He's heard the UK's death toll has now topped 75,000, and his heart goes out to the medics with whom he trained. He knows that personal protective equipment is in such short supply here that some staff have gone to work in bin bags. The chickens, he says, have come home to roost. Having starved the NHS of resources for a decade, the government now asks it to withstand a pandemic. The very same government that failed to prepare for what was recognised as the nation's #1 threat. Ollie warns me that almond milk is an environmentally questionable product. More than 80% of the world's almonds come from California, where water shortages are increasingly frequent. Between 2011 and 2016, the Golden State experienced a drought that lasted for 340 weeks. In its final year alone, 62 million trees died. Almond trees are gluttons for water, every single kernel requiring roughly 2 litres to form. I assure my son that almond milk that I sampled came from Italy, but admit it's possibly a controversial crop there too. I reassure him that my transition is to oat milk, and it's complete. In fact, I'm loving it. It's time for dinner. As I am hungry, I wolf down roasted vegetables bathed in a tahini sauce with a side plate of banana chips, a produce of the Philippines. Oh dear, 519 calories per 100 grams. A penny drops with a clang. I won't necessarily lose weight on a vegan diet. So I researched the Stoic definition of temperance, to find it concerns far more than merely the consumption of material goods, whether alcohol or banana chips that have flown halfway round the planet. Temperance is the understanding that abundance comes from having no more than you need, from understanding that enough really is enough. Additionally, it means having the grace and mental agility to remain detached and objective, particularly at moments of triumph or disaster. Is Mary Oliver being optimistic or fearful in her poem Heron Rises from the Dark Summer Pond, when she suggests that death may, perhaps, be more than a hole in the ground? In his final book, Mortality, Christopher Hitchens's unflinching account of his terminal illness, the iconoclast isn't the least troubled by that hole in the ground. However, he suffers a fit of the blues when recalling the very high bar set by the American educationalist Horace Mann, who asserted that, until you have done something for humanity, you should be ashamed to die. Hitchens's blues must be seen in context. The journalist and essayist who did more than most to shine a light on hypocrisy and corruption in high places regrets that the type of cancer killing him prevents him from participating in experimental treatments that could possibly lead to a breakthrough discovery that would aid humanity for centuries to come. He writes, I would have happily offered myself as an experimental subject for new drugs or new surgeries, partly, of course, in the hope that they might salvage me, but also on the Horace Mann principle. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, contemplates the ephemeral nature of our lives with his feet planted in reality, while at the same time offering us a timely definition of wisdom in this unsparing critique of himself. Soon you will die, and yet still you aren't sincere, undisturbed, or free from the suspicion that external things can harm you. Nor are you gracious to all, despite knowing that wisdom and acting justly are one and the same.